Welcome, everyone, to the 30-minute Midas Touch from beautiful Dyersburg, Tennessee at the Herb Welsh WrestlePlex. Now, here is, pound for pound and inch for inch, the best of the best in professional wrestling today. A wrestling genius worth his weight in gold. The Golden Boy, Greg Anthony.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 30-minute Midas Touch. I am your host, the Golden Boy, Greg Anthony. And with me, as always, is my co-host, for the betterment of mankind, Mark Tipton.
For the betterment of mankind. That's a very kind of audacious, I appreciate that one. That's a nice moniker and one to have thrown my way. I appreciate that. And that one, I can latch on to, and I do see where you're going with that in this case, because for the subject matter of this edition of the 30-minute Midas Touch podcast, we're going to focus on one particular wrestler who can rightfully be called a legend, certainly in one area of wrestling in particular, and it's someone who's near and dear to my heart. I think on this podcast I've mentioned before, he's probably my favorite wrestler of all time. And I have to, favorite and greatest are not necessarily the same thing, but I think we'll discuss that a little bit further along. But the individual we're talking about is someone I fondly know as Mrs. Foley's baby boy, Mick Foley.
Yeah, and Mick Foley is, you probably don't realize it by looking at the way that I wrestle, but Mick Foley is actually one of my biggest influences, especially in my teenage years. It's more, he's more influential to my, how I cut a promo and how I talk to the people. We seem to have that same kind of cadence and rhythm to the way we talk, and we italicize certain words and, put stamps on certain things and create, which I always love, was creating a vocabulary that is unique to your own, And, when I was coming up as a teenager, that was his, pretty much his hottest time right there,
Certainly.
And, I've said it before, the two matches that you can credit and or blame.
Yeah, he is the subject of some debate.
Yes. Credit and or blame for me to being a professional wrestler. It's Flair versus Steamboat, 2 out of 3 falls. Because that was the first one I saw when I was a kid that I said, hey, I'm going to be a professional wrestler after that. And then the second one is when I was 16, 17 years old, and I was thinking about getting into wrestling, and I saw Mankind and Undertaker, Hell in a Cell.
Okay.
And
King of the Ring 98.
King of the Ring 98. And, that whole situation is think about what I just said there. Flair, Steamboat, Undertaker, Mankind,
right.
Completely two different.
Yeah, they're very different entities.
Yeah, and the thing was, I tell people all the time, it wasn't because I wanted to get thrown off a 20-foot structure like Mick Foley did.
No.
But after that match, I realized if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to be a professional wrestler, then I have to care as much about it as Mick Foley. You know what I mean? And that's kind of that was a turning point for me.
Okay, well, there you've hit on something that when I made a differentiation, and this is purely from a fan perspective. When I say fan versus greatest, if you ask me who the greatest, Mick Foley, in all honesty, probably wouldn't make my top 5 or top 10 or anything of that nature, because I don't think he is. But when I say favorite, it's someone I connect to as a fan, and that's based upon the fact that when I'm, as a fan, I kind of derive a feeling about the way this person looks at the professional wrestling, fairly or unfairly. I draw conclusions about the way they approach it, and Mick Foley is someone who it was clear to me early on that this is an individual who loves professional wrestling.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that I teach all my students here at the Pro Wrestling Mid-South Academy is, if you don't love this, you're not going to last very long. You know what I mean? Because this shit hurts. You understand? And unless you have this passion, this unbelievable, I want to say mental instability to get into professional wrestling, then you have to love it. There's no way around it. You're not gonna go through all the sacrifices and all the pain and all the bumps and the bruises if you're just doing it for shits and giggles. And
Right.
if you are, you're not going to last very long.
Right. Well, I suppose one way, kind of a starting point for this is, obviously he's written a number of books, and so there's a number of things about his background that are widely known. Uh, but one of the things that helped me as a fan is he connected to me as a fellow fan. When he was, I believe it was during his time in college, there was a big match coming up at Madison Square Garden between Jimmy Superfly Snuka and Don the Rock Morocco, I believe. It was a match that that ended with Superfly Snuka coming off the top of the cage with the big splash. And this was something that so enthralled him as a fan that my understanding is he actually was hitchhiking or doing doing whatever he had to do to get to Madison Square Garden, to be in the audience. And I have seen, I believe on the WWE Network, they actually, through the footage, were able to find him and circle him to see where he was in the audience that day. And that just let me know where he's coming from.
He like you said, he hitchhiked his way to Madison Square Garden just to see that match, and got himself on the floor pretty much.
Right.
And it got him in camera view, and he's right there plain as day. You can tell it's Mick Foley, from the footage. But even before that, once he was in WWE and they started delving into the history of Cactus Jack and started kind of going in that direction, what came out? The whole Dude Love.
The loved one.
The loved one, yeah. The Dude Love old videotapes that they made when he was in high school.
He made in his backyard, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing that resonated so much with me myself, because that's what we did. We thought we were professional wrestlers, and we pretended to be that as best we can.
Absolutely.
And where he was Dude Love, and then eventually Dude Love became a WWE character of all things.
Yes.
Right. I've always been the Golden Boy. You know what I
Right.
mean? So like even back then I was the Golden Boy.
Sure.
So like. And just the jumping off the house, of course. We
don't encourage.
We don't want to encourage that. However,
please do not try this at home.
For full disclosure, I did do that on several occasions, to quote unquote pop my friends. I actually had a Shaquille O'Neal standee.
Okay.
That my grandmother got me from Kroger or something because he was selling Pepsi or something.
Sure.
Right? And I took that Shaq standee and I put it in a recliner, and I pulled the recliner outside, and then I did a crossbody off the roof of my house onto Shaq. And then I ventured into other things, like
sure.
I leg dropped. I had an old Army duffel bag.
Okay.
The old Army duffel bag
with
the strap
at the top.
Yeah. I had one of those, so I stuffed it with pillows and stuff like that. And I put shorts and a T-shirt on it, and I called it Steve the Jobber. And that's who I beat up around the house was Steve the Jobber. This is Wrestling Buddy 3.0 at this point. So I put Steve the Jobber on our grill outside in the back, and then I jumped off with an RVD leg drop and bounced off.
What could go wrong?
Yeah. I look at it now, I'm like, what the F was I thinking? I would never in a million years. And if my kids did that, I'd beat them to death, I think. But I mean, then it seemed like a good idea. So here we are.
Right, but that kind of sets the stage. This was an individual who absolutely loves this and loves it in much the way that I do. And so when I see that and that comes across to me, it is something I, as a fan, immediately gravitate to. And I suppose we could move on into how he got started. We mentioned his fandom and going to the Garden, etc. But he also decided to train to become a professional wrestler. And the way he did this, and he details this quite a bit in some of his writings, that he was trained by Dominic DeNucci. And he details the travels, and I believe he even slept in his car on some occasions to participate in the training sessions.
I think it was every weekend he slept in his car. Like
Okay.
he would literally leave Friday afternoon from college and then get to DeNucci. I think it was in Pittsburgh.
I
right?
believe so.
Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, one of the two.
I believe it was Pittsburgh. As I recall, I think Shane Douglas was there at approximately the same time.
That's what I was
going
going
to
to
say.
say.
He's a Pittsburgh guy.
Yeah, and that was part of the thing too. Like here's Shane Douglas, who by all means was pretty much like almost like a natural when it came to athleticism, things like that. And then you got Mick Foley,
Right.
who is fighting and clawing for everything. So he like you said in his books, he makes comparisons of that kind of stuff. Like, here I was, I had 10 times the heart. So I mean, here I was trying my best to keep up with Shane Douglas, and
Right.
and at that time I really couldn't, but I was damn it, I was going to try.
Right.
But that's something I tell I get messages about training all the time, and I tell people all the time, like, well, it's too far, it's too much money, or if it's too this or too that, and it's like, listen, Mick Foley slept in his car all weekend just to learn how to be a professional wrestler.
Yes.
If you can drive 2 hours, I think you'll be all right. You know what I mean? If you really want it bad enough, you'll find a way to do it.
Right, and he did, and it certainly plays into, and I think it's kind of a theme of his career. You mentioned how he wasn't as naturally gifted an athlete, which he, and if you watched him, is pretty clear he's not, and everyone understands that as someone like Shane Douglas or others, and it was where much in the same way he had to, he wanted it bad enough he found a way to get trained. And it seemed to me that he wanted it bad enough to be successful as a professional wrestler that he went about finding a way to do so.
Yeah, I mean, is there anyone that got more with less? It'd be hard to venture someone else, right?
It's hard to imagine.
Yeah, I mean, even a guy like the Ultimate Warrior, at least he had his body and stuff going for him. We've all seen that
sure.
1,000 times. But here's a guy that doesn't have the body.
No.
Doesn't have the athleticism.
No.
Doesn't necessarily have a gimmick that is going to transcend the business like The Rock did or anything like that.
Certainly.
But then, ergo, what does he do? He transcends the business.
Exactly. He found a way.
He found a way.
Because he wanted it badly enough. And I guess we should, for those of you who did not see him early in his career, he did spend time with a number of organizations. I know he spent time in the USWA. And World Class. I believe that was the first place I ever saw him.
Yeah.
He spent during the.
He was tag team with Gary Young.
Yes.
They're actually a very underrated tag team.
Yes.
They're actually pretty formidable.
Yes, and they went around and really, as I recall, even at this point in his career, we kind of saw the beginnings of the links he was going to. As I recall. When in his days, and I think he mentions this too in his writing, in his days at the Sportatorium, an arena with a wood, it seemed to me like a basketball floor, of the arena.
Like a solid slat wood floor.
Something similar that they had at the Sportatorium in Dallas, Texas. And even at that point, he'd begun, during his matches, leaping off the apron to deliver an elbow to his opponent on the floor.
Yeah, I mean, and that's just part of it. The other thing was the Nest T bump. You ever heard about the Nest T bump?
No, tell me more.
So the Nest T bump is when he'd be on the apron and he'd have someone come knock him off.
Okay.
And he would take a full-fledged back bump.
Straight to the
concrete.
Okay, I never heard it called that.
Yeah, he called it that in the book. He called it the Nest. Remember the Nest T plunge, the commercial?
Certainly.
Where they jumped off into the pool?
Right.
That's what it looked like.
That's what he was doing.
That's what he was doing. And
that slipped my mind then.
So the real rib came when he did it one night and everyone, popped for it. Like, oh my God, I can't believe he did that, blah, 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 And then the promoters asked him to do it again tomorrow night.
Oh.
And then they asked him, so he did it on the entire loop is what ends up happening.
No.
So you can imagine taking that bump every night. And we wonder why Mick Foley can hardly walk nowadays.
Right.
And that's just one indication, but he did that his entire career.
And really, those sorts of things became the way he stood out. Some people stand out because we mentioned their look, their physique, their abilities on the microphone, whatever it is, their ability to do great, athletic feats and flips and 450s or whatever you want to say. He didn't have those things. And it seemed to me that he kind of found that the ability to take bigger falls or bumps or however you want to say it than others did was something that allowed him to attempt to stand out and be successful.
Yeah, I mean, we were just watching something that I'm actually in the process right now of watching pretty much every WCW pay-per-view, right? So I'm kind of going chronologically, just watching everything. And like Mick Foley is a huge part of WCW in the early '90s, and like he was doing all kinds of crazy stuff. Not just the elbow off the apron, but then he was doing the elbow off the second to the floor,
Okay.
and then he was doing a sunset flip off the second to the floor.
Oh.
You know what I mean? Like it's just some crazy. I actually just shared something in our academy group the other day where he took the Nestea plunge again. He was on the apron and Jerry Sags
Okay.
came and knocked him off with a shoulder tackle, and he took the most vicious bump off the apron straight to the straight concrete floor because Knobs had pulled up the padding.
It pulled. Oh no.
So he took it flat to the actual it's the word sickening thud I think was invented because of Mick Foley. The phrase, I mean.
Oh, well, there you mentioned WCW, and I guess we should mention the name. During his time in World Class is when the Cactus Jack.
Yeah, Cactus Jack, but he was.
Well, I guess it was it because at one point it was
Cactus Jack.
Manson. Yes, thank
yeah.
you. Because
there were several different incarnations of that. I always stuck with the Manson one myself because obviously the name Manson has a huge connotation with Charlie Manson and things like that.
Sure, and with his facial hair and things, he kind of resembled.
Yeah, a little
and
bit.
so it kind of, and he was the crazy guy, and so it just I believe it was suggested to him by some promoter. I don't think it's something he came up with.
No,
I don't believe.
I think it was, they said he needed a last name with it. And
right, because
Cactus
Jack was his dad. Is that correct?
And they used to call him Cactus Jack.
Okay.
Him and his friends used to call him Cactus Jack because his dad was an athletic director in the school system.
Yes, he was.
And like he would lean against one of the posts at the school and watch the games and stuff like that, and he looked like a cactus.
Okay.
So they would call him Cactus Jack. So then he became Cactus Jack when he started wrestling, and then someone suggested the Manson part and things like that. And another great thing about the whole Cactus Jack persona and gimmick itself was Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. I mean, like I love stuff like that. I love where's Memphis, Tennessee, New York City, stuff like that. I love the Red Hook section of Brooklyn, New York. You know,
yeah, it kind of stands out.
Yeah, it sets you apart from everyone else and things like that. So I love hearing little things like that. Like with the Ray Boys here in our promotion, we always did from the banks of Real Foot Lake.
Yeah, never, not from a town.
No.
Right.
Yeah.
And so and it's unique. And I guess you could even play off the Undertaker was always promoted as being from Death Valley,
right?
Which makes sense and Truth or Consequences. It's just a great name. It works with the cactus part because you kind of think of the Western and so forth. But Truth or Consequences, to me, is just a great hometown for a wrestler to kind of be from.
Yeah, especially one like him. Like, that fit. It's one of those things like you wouldn't even think of that.
Right.
But when you put it together with Cactus Jack, you're like, oh, yeah, that works.
That's the perfect place for him to be from.
Yeah, exactly.
And, Cactus Jack from Long Island. Well, it's not quite.
Speaking of Long Island, though, you reminded me of something else. You know, we talked about how he started his training with Shane Douglas.
Yes.
Right. Well, he was actually amateur wrestled in high school.
Okay.
And there's a picture floating around the internet, and I don't know if this is 100% true, so no one shoot me if it's. But there's a picture floating around of him and the comedian / actor Kevin James. Like they went to high school together, and we're on the high school wrestling team together.
Okay.
And I know Kevin James actually was an amateur wrestler because he did that movie, Here Comes the Boom.
Yeah.
Where he kind of leaned into that a little bit.
Okay.
But there's a picture floating around of those two when they're teenagers on the wrestling team. So I hope that's true. But like I said, I haven't seen one way or another where it's verified. But
all right. Now during this WCW, I guess one thing we should sneak in is kind of one of his trademarks came to be he would in the WWF he would always pull back his hair and you would notice that a large portion of his ear was missing. This occurred during his time in WCW. When he was wrestling, I believe it was Van Vader, and I want to say it was in Germany.
Yeah, it was in Germany, and so the match before was Too Cold Scorpio.
Yes.
And Too Cold Scorpio came to the back and told the technicians, "Hey, listen, the ropes are loose."
Okay.
Right, so they went out during that thing and just tightened the fuck.
They fixed that.
Yeah. So they went out and tightened the ropes, and then by the time Foley and Vader went to the ring. Foley used to do this beautiful spot that very few people in professional wrestling can do, where you dive and twist and get your head caught
between the top and middle rope.
Between the top and middle rope. It's a very dangerous thing to do.
Right.
And
Once again, don't necessarily try this.
No, and I've seen less than 10 people my entire life do that spot.
Right.
And I've thought about doing it, but I just don't have the balls to try. But like that was one of his key spots. He did it quite often, especially in big match situations. So he went to do it with that, and his head got stuck, and it was like he felt like he said his head was going to pop off. So the referee's trying to help him get out, and he has to like pull his head out of the ropes, and like his ear gets basically
it's severed from the side of his head.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it was so tight, and the referee couldn't pull the ropes apart, nor neither could he. And as I recall, that they actually tried to save the part. I'm trying to remember. This is vague in my memory, but they put it in a glass of milk or something.
I don't remember hearing that part. I just remember him saying that he lost his ear because he didn't know how to say formaldehyde in German. Or if the word actually, I think he actually was I want to say he was almost like fluent in German. They said, but he didn't know what that one word. So like, he couldn't figure out what to do. But yeah, so they threw it away in the trash. I think he said, like in front of him. Like he said, it was just
Yeah, well.
Yeah, there it goes.
I guess the price you pay, I suppose, and as part of the price, and to his credit, he just kind of made it part of the persona.
Yeah.
He did, and I guess we should, before time gets too far away, he spent some time in WCW, but he was never, and I seem to recall he had one match he was really proud of with Sting, and I forget where the event occurred.
Yeah, it was, I can't remember where it was either, but it was a Falls Count Anywhere match.
And it was something that
was where I saw the sunset off the second.
Okay.
That was where that was.
Okay, but I remember him mentioning that match and meant a great deal to him. But he really felt like he was spinning his wheels in WCW. One thing leads to another, and he made his way to the place where I think Cactus Jack kind of became. Well, he came to a part of his career, I should say. In America, he made his way to ECW.
Yeah.
He did spend, and I'm trying to remember the time frame, but he also around this time participated in the King of the Deathmatch tournament, and I believe it's IWA in Japan.
Yeah, and like with that, like I think I've said it before on here too. I actually tape traded to get the King of the Deathmatch tournament. Like I traded a guy out in California, and he sent me the King of the Deathmatch stuff, so I could finally see the whole thing together, because I had heard about it, obviously, but I never got to see it. And like I said, that by today's death match standards, you know what I mean, that's a very tame thing. But then when you look at it now, it's still very dangerous. The one bump he takes off a ladder through barbed wire on the no rope barbed wire, like lands in the barbed wire. That's insane. You know what I mean?
Yes.
But and obviously Terry Funk being his biggest idol.
Right.
You know what I mean? And him in that match with Terry Funk,
Absolutely.
And I think that's kind of where the ECW thing came along, because I think he was following suit.
Right. And he went along. When he made his way to ECW, and, this is where the hardcore legend kind of began with Mick Foley, with his time in the King of the Death match. And then ECW was what it was. It was hardcore wrestling. It was where it was popularized, and he became, widely known as part of it. But one of the things that I think people need to understand and also appreciate was during his time in ECW was when he really developed his talents at delivering promos. Or it really, when he gives a promo, it always feels like more like storytelling than necessarily a wrestling promo.
Well, it feels like you're really talking to him.
Right.
It doesn't feel like it's a put-on kind of thing. Even when he was exaggerating his voice for Cactus Jack or Mankind, stuff like that, it still felt really real. Right. Or genuine, I guess is the word I was looking for. But like, yeah, and one of my favorite things from the ECW stuff wasn't necessarily the hardcore stuff. It was when the person had brought the sign that said Kane Dewey.
Yes.
And that was his son, and he got legitimately upset about that. Like, who the
Right.
you sick sons of bitches? How do you dare you try to bring my toddler into this
Right.
and say Kane Dewey? And then it
Right.
became a situation where he hated the hardcore fans, ergo he hated hardcore. He wanted to get back on Uncle Eric's good side and get back to WCW.
Right.
So he started placating to that, and he would, to the point to where he would rear back like he was going to hit someone with a fist, and the crowd would be like, ah, and then he would grab a headlock.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And then like, and everybody's like, oh, you son of a bitch. Like, how do you get heat with smart people? I mean, that's how it's done right there. You make them, even though they think they're smart, you make them the mark. And like it ends up working.
It still makes me laugh every time I think about it. And really, for background, around this time in history, there was an American citizen who got into some kind of criminal trouble, and I don't remember if it was Singapore or Thailand or.
I think it was Singapore.
Okay, and part of the punishment that this individual got was he was caned.
Yeah, and there was a big uproar.
There was an uproar
because this American was going to get caned in Singapore.
Like, but when you're, when in Rome.
Right.
If that's what their rules are, that's what their rules are.
How about you not? I think he spray painted something, didn't he?
It was something that would be considered minor by American criminal justice, and
like a $50 fine here.
Yeah, right. And and so it was in the news, and so someone decided that they would and the ECW crowd was notorious for trying to be outrageous and push an envelope, and someone thought it'd be funny to reference Mick Foley's son, Dewey, and say Kane Dewey.
Mm-hmm.
And I do appreciate this about Mick Foley, who instead of instead of saying, well, nowadays that son would probably be taken away from the audience member and thrown away, and very little would ever do with it. But because of the way he thinks professional wrestling, in my opinion, this is where I'm about to give opinion,
Mm-hmm.
he saw that as an opportunity, and he delivered the Kane Dewey promo.
Yeah, and I really think, and I think it was that work that really got him into WWE.
Right. It was character work.
Yeah, it was character work. You know what I mean? And I think Jim Ross had said he had tried for several years to try to get Vince to hire Cactus Jack, and he would never go for it. But then they came up with, well, let's make him something else. We could use him like that.
Sure.
And luckily, I think one of the names that Mankind was gonna be originally was Mason the Mutilator.
Right, I remember the Mutilator. I didn't remember the first.
Yeah, I think
name.
it was Mason the Mutilator.
Sure.
And then Foley, being the genius that he is, goes, what if it was Mankind? Like, I'm doing this all for the benefit
of Mankind.
Yeah, and he sold it to Vince like that, and that's what it ended up being. So he saved himself a very
right. Well, honestly, that if he had just accepted that as an opportunity to get his foot in the door, we may never have seen the full career that he had.
Yeah.
Because making that work would have been
damn near impossible.
Right.
But like also, when he got to the Mankind stuff, like he was, he went toe to toe with the Undertaker.
Yes.
Here's someone that's an established main event guy within this company, and he's going toe to toe with him, and it just made sense. You know what I mean? Like, if you're going to put Mankind with somebody on that roster,
he's
at that time,
he's in effect a monster.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what it was. It was the wrestling equivalent of Godzilla versus King Kong kind of thing.
Yeah, the boiler room brawls.
Right. Exactly.
That kind of stuff. I mean, that was beautiful stuff, and I think all that really helped move him along.
Okay. Time's about running out very quickly. We mentioned his promos. He did an interview, and what really I think changed his career before we saw all the other things was he did an interview with Jim Ross where he talked about his childhood and kind of how Mankind came to be and this elaborate backstory that created this full character. And I thought that was something that was spawned during his time in ECW that really paid off when he made it to WWE.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said, his promo work is impeccable. In most cases, like one of my favorites is it's a little to well known promo, but like right after SummerSlam '98, he would been tagging with Kane, and Kane turned on him at SummerSlam. So the next night on Raw, he rides a hospital stretcher down Gurney, like rides it down the ramp, and runs and smacks into the ring. And gets up and basically tells, it was cahoots all along, and like goes into this beautiful promo about how, he said, well, I'm going to challenge Kane to redemption lies right above my head. And it was the Hell in a Cell. And he's like, when I get in that cage, I'm going to well, I'm going to get my ass kicked, aren't I? He said, well, that's okay. You know, I got 1,000 thumbtacks for that big burnt bastard. And he threw a handful of thumbtacks out. And he goes, and it really doesn't matter to me because it wouldn't be the first time I got my ass kicked in Philadelphia. And it was like, true. How beautiful is that, though, that he was able to work that. And that's what I tell guys all the time. It's completely different to quote unquote shoot in a promo, but when you can say something like that to where the smart fans know, but then the other fans don't go, what am I missing?
Right.
You know what I mean? It fits in with both sides. That's the beauty of storytelling within a promo.
Okay, and if we have a second, does it slip in one last thing?
Sure.
That was very significant is, or at least it's significant to me, because Mick Foley, this guy who was not the most athletic or beautiful or best promo or whatever you want to say, guy destined to be a star, came to be, and particularly for me, considered the turning point of the Monday Night War. Yeah. When he became the WWF champion. It is widely told that the Raw on which this happened, where he became champion, was taped. And on Monday Night Nitro, on taped events of Raw, Eric Bischoff had taken to the decision to give away the results of Raw to encourage people to stay watching Nitro at the same time. And they gave away that Mick Foley was going to become the WWF champion. And it is registered, by the ratings, that at that moment, people turned their televisions over to Monday Night Raw. And I can testify to this personally. I'm one of those people. I was watching Nitro. I heard that. And as soon as they told me that, I jumped up, and at this time I had a VCR. For those of you that don't remember how old this is. But I immediately jumped up, switched over to the USA Network, and grabbed and was desperately looking for tapes to put in because I wanted to record this. And so for anyone who thought that giving away their results, it totally backfired on them in this case. And that was kind of viewed as the turning point of the end of the infamous 83 weeks when WWE began to make their comeback and eventually defeat WCW in the Monday Night War.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that was, beautiful about that whole thing was Mick Foley is a 3-time WWE champion.
Mm-hmm.
But he's only been champion for a total of like 31 days or something.
Oh, sure.
So it goes to show you, it doesn't matter how long you're champion.
No.
As long as, like I said, we remember him as a 3-time champion. And it's in the history books. But, no one goes, yeah, but he was 31 days. No one ever, it doesn't register.
And now I'm about to quote, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. And on that note, we're out of time. Just a little bit over 30 minutes this time, but that's okay. For myself, the Golden Boy Greg Anthony, and for my co-hosts, for the betterment of mankind, Mark Tipton, thank you and goodbye.